Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the role of climate information in enhancing smallholder resilience and adaptation strategies. I am Emma Odera, and I'll be your host for this session. For all those interested in our Climate Resilience Agriculture Virtual Cup, the active members benefit from using this CRAgVC platform to promote pitches and content and gain access to our international chapters. Selected applicants will enjoy membership perks, including monthly Zoom calls, support in resource mobilization, investment, technical advice, and mentoring for scalable solutions. We also organize special focus webinars and workshops for our active members. With housekeeping out of the way, I would like to give the floor to our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Nono. Welcome.
Great. Thanks, Emma. Hi, everyone. My name is Nono Sakhoto. I am Program Manager, Agribusiness Network at the African Leadership Academy. And I'm also a farmer, commercial farmer, focusing on cattle. That's been my livestock has been my focus. But the overall work that I've been doing over the last 12 to 13 years has really been focused on how we support young people developing their careers across the agriculture value chain. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Maria.
I'm Maria Kiboi. I am a meteorologist and a climate scientist. I work in research areas on weather and climate information, and currently I'm affiliated to Kenya Meteorological Society. And I'm glad to be here, and I look forward for a successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those introductions. As we move into our discussion, I want to share a statement from one of our smallholder farmers that we interviewed here at MSc. And I would like to share the statement, and I quote, "The weatherman has failed me. I now rely on traditional methods to predict weather for planting." This brings us to our critical point of our conversation today. So we know there are varied challenges that smallholder farmers face due to climate change. I'm curious about the most essential climate information that they need to have an effective decision and the most effective channels that can be used to disseminate this information to them. We could start with you, Maria, on this.
Looking into our question on the kind of information that our smallholder farmers, I think one of the key information which has already been there is our weather forecast, which helps them to make decisions on their planting and also harvesting systems, seasons, and also how they can optimize. This will help them to optimize yields and also minimize losses. So I think one of the information from my desk are the weather forecast that we issue.
Weather is relevant everywhere, but the other key information, which I think is also critical, is either information such as seed and fertilizers that might be relevant for specific production. So of course, you've all heard about weather resilient kind of seeds. So having information and knowing about that is really important, because a lot of smallholder farmers aren't really aware of what technologies are available to them or that are in existence. So I think for me, information around various technologies that are available to support in that is really critical information that smallholder farmers need. And I think the second part of your question, which is that dissemination of that information. So as we know, there's a lot of various information that is available, but how smallholder farmers get it is very critical. I mean, we think of ways to disseminate will be obviously extension services. Some areas that do have extension services, that's obviously kind of the first point of call of how to disseminate that information. You have smallholder farmers who also are part of either associations or organizations or any groups, community groups. That's also a good way to do that. The other one is also thinking there's a lot of NGOs, especially across the continent, who really are supporting smallholder farmers in various projects and community projects. they are a great way to also disseminate. And another interesting one for me is young people in schools. That's really a good way to kind of get that information back to their homes, to their parents who are actually in that farming community. Being able to disseminate and share critical information that young people can take home, whether it's, regardless of what kind of standard or, age they're at. That's really a good way to take information to farmers.
I'd like to come back to you, Maria. I think you missed telling us the most effective channels for disseminating this information. Maybe you have something to add on it?
One of the other channels, we have weather stations in our different counties in the country. I'm speaking about Kenya, and I'm also sure other countries have this, where we get to release our monthly weather outlooks or even seasonal and weekly. We also have daily and also agrometeorological information to reach our farmers via our county directors. So we have those weather stations, and also this information can also be found in websites and newsletters and also bulletins. But for those farmers who can access, for those who cannot access, we have the community meetings, as my friend has mentioned, where these informations are explained to our farmers. And also we have traditional media, those who can access newspapers. I think the weather information and agrometeorological information, or the information around farming, are also posted there for our farmers to have a look on the new technologies. We have tailor-made information for specific counties, the type of seeds, and also the rainfall and temperature requirements for different crops in those bulletins or the newspapers. And I've also mentioned about we have television or TV channels for our farmers who can access such. There are shows. We have one which has been there for some time, Shamba Shape Up. Such channels are very informative. Yeah, thank you, Emma.
Okay, thank you for those important inputs. But before we proceed to the next question, I'd like to remind our audience to kindly post their questions in the chat box, which will be taken during our Q&A time. So moving on to our next question, what are the main barriers that smallholder farmers face when accessing this climate information, and what immediate actions can be taken to overcome these barriers? Let's start with you, Nono.
So, I think if you do get access to that information, if the farmers do get access to the information, if there are instructions of either something that needs to be done, sometimes there's lack of training on that information that is being provided. So it's important to kind of have setups where when that information is disseminated, there's actual instructions and training to enable people to be able to use that information. So if the information is there and you're not able to use it, that's obviously the issue. So for me, that lack around training and ensuring that that's in place. And as we mentioned, that could be rather through, training is in a variety of ways, rather even, radio stations can also provide a certain type of way of instructions of following certain things. Community projects can actually show, sometimes you need to actually see what is being done for the training. And then, of course, the other barrier is literacy levels. So depending on how this information is provided, some people may not be able to read if it is, in readable format. So, of course, it's also important to make sure that you're providing it in a way that people can consume it. And so you need to be appropriate. So knowing the community you're actually providing that information is so critical, so that you know how you're able to disseminate that information. The other thing, which is, I'll just kind of highlight on, is the relevance. So some information is not necessarily relevant to some communities. So if we're in an area that is a lot of rain versus an area that doesn't have rain, so the type of information that needs to go to the communities needs to be relevant. So for me, that's always a barrier sometimes when information is just disseminated generally across many different communities. Then it's kind of irrelevant for some and relevant for some. So for me, it's really around understanding the community that you are going to be providing that information, understanding their situation so that you're able to tailor the information so that it's relevant. So relevance is often a challenge and a barrier. And I think it's about researching and being able to know the community well enough to ensure that information that is provided is relevant. So those are the few I can highlight.
Thank you very much, Nono. Can we hear from you, Maria, as well?
Yeah, sure. Maybe to add on what Nono has mentioned, we can have cost barriers to the access of this information because, you know, we have something like internet access, which most farmers don't have. So we can advise our government, I think through government-sponsored programs or community-based initiatives, to partner with the source of this information so that we can have the information reach our farmers in good time. Also, we have around, I think Nono has mentioned, proper training on the use of the information or consumption. So we can work around raising awareness and also building trust. You know, most farmers, I think in our past decade, we had a discussion around they no longer trust, I think, our scientific forecasts. So we are working around raising awareness on how important this information is to them. And also we are finding ways of integrating their indigenous or their traditional ways of weather forecasting into our scientific models. Yeah, I think those two are the ones that I can add on into what Nana has mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria. But before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of one of our panelists, Ram, here. So I'd like Ram to introduce himself, then we can carry on with our conversation. Welcome, Ram.
Thank you, Adira. Yeah, you want me to introduce myself, right? Okay, hi. So my name is Ram Dulipala. I work with the International Livestock Research Institute as a senior scientist. I'm based in Nairobi. My area of interest is actually broadly digital agriculture. Within digital agriculture also, I'm more interested in integrating climate and weather data or climate information services into agriculture advisories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ram. We were discussing on the main barriers that farmers face when accessing and utilizing this climate information. Probably you could just talk a little bit about that, then also talk about the immediate actions that can be taken to overcome these barriers.
Okay. See, in terms of barriers, one is there are, of course, access barriers, right? Like, for instance, if you really think about it, probably 40 or 50 years ago when information and communication technology wasn't as mature as it is today, the conventional system of transmitting weather information or weather forecasts from the Met agencies to farmers was possibly, you know, some sort of a village community center where somebody would post the images of the forecast, so on and so forth, right? So from that stage, in terms of enabling access, today you have mobile technology, you have radio, you have TV. So we have a lot of new electronic media for transmitting the weather information, say from the Met agencies all the way through to the farmers, right? So the access has improved. But coming to the other aspect of it is the reliability and the utility of the forecast itself, right? Like, you know, no weather forecast can be deterministic. You know, we are not gods to 100% predict what's going to happen, right? But having said that, the whole discipline of weather forecasting, you know, potentially to support agriculture decision making has some scientific basis and validity to it, right? So for that to happen, there is a whole new discipline called agrometeorology, where you don't look at weather forecasting per se, but you look at weather forecasting more with more to sort of come up with the data and information products that are more relevant for agriculture, right? Now, that space has probably also improved drastically in the last 20-30 years, primarily for two reasons. One is today, Met agencies themselves have a lot of computing power. You see, end of the day, meteorology is a very compute intensive process, right? So Met agencies have been able to invest in their own hardware infrastructure. Like I know in India, government of India has set up a new supercomputer with $100 million for India Met department, right? So the computing power has become better. That is number one. Second, lot of Met agencies, and especially with the advent of artificial intelligence and machine learning, so on and so forth, the whole process of weather forecasting also has become that much more data driven, that much better, right? So yeah, so if you, for me, I look at the progress of the space broadly in two buckets. One bucket is the forecasts got better. That is, the spatial resolution of your forecast, the temporal resolution of your forecast. Like you don't just today, you don't have forecast just for the next 7 days, but you have seasonal forecasts which tell you how the season is going to have pan out. You have a 4-week forecast telling you how the next 1 month is going to look. So the quality of the data, the reliability of the data, the spatial and temporal resolution of data has become better. That is one. And second, on the dissemination side, you have that many more newer channels for you to disseminate with this weather forecasting information to the farmer in a much more cost-effective way, right? But having said that, there are of course many barriers. One is, will the farmer simply start trusting a new data point on his or her mobile phone vis-a-vis what the farmer knows through his or her own indigenous knowledge or through his own community, right? So there are a lot of those issues of how do you sort of contextualize this information in a form and a format that is more palatable to the farmer. I think those are some of the emerging newer issues which probably needs to be bridged both through science, through capacity building, through development.
Thank you very much for those insights, Ram. We are now at a time where technology is evolving, and from your experience, which innovative practices or technologies have shown great promise in assisting smallholders, farmers in adapting to climate variability and change? Let's start with you, Nono.
So I think for me, it's been interesting to learn around how young people have been coming up with interesting solutions. As I said, in my space, that's kind of what's glaring in my space. And funny enough, I was going to actually mention a project that Brian Brian in your team has actually done as a young person with their community project. And for me, it's around them being able to use some of the knowledge that they've got, that they study, right? So a lot of the young people who are going into studies around climate change and coming back home and really finding those solutions. I'm thinking that is such a really great way to find new innovative ways to support our communities. So have young people who have grown around those communities, who know and understand what's going on, and being able to acquire external knowledge to come up with ways and very relevant solutions. So for instance, in one of the projects that they've done was really to find ways to have a production that is climate resilient for that community. And as I said, mentioning that point around relevance, right? Relevance for that community, being able to create it in a way that they could do training that enabled those who were disabled or had other difficulties to be able to actually participate in such production. So for me, innovations in this space really come from people who are part of the community and are learning external other knowledge that they probably wouldn't have had in their community, to be able to bring some of those solutions and create them very specifically to that community. So for me, I think it's around finding effective ways for our own communities to really come up with those solutions. So that's an example I have at the top of my head. I'll think of others.
That's fine. Maria, what about you?
Yeah, Emma, as Ram was thinking, I think we have the climate information services, where the responsible institutions like one Ram is working in, we have ILRI, where we are really trying to improve what the information we are giving out to our farmers. So we are doing our best to also have a partnership with farmers, or rather coordination, where these days we are involving them in our focus so that we can have tailor-made climate information for different regions or different areas, and also tailored to different crops and also seasons. So I think from my point, I'll add on that. And also the upcoming of AI, we are trying to integrate that. So we are working around AI and also indigenous knowledge to boost the information that we are giving out to our farmers to the best, to be localized, yeah, and also to be crop specific and also livestock specific. And also, I think we also have youths, as I will just echo Nono, who are really working around climate smart agriculture. And also we have been seeing grants out here for innovative ideas around that. So we also have our farmers are working around climate smart agriculture. I think they're integrating these days they're advised to integrate crop and also livestock production systems. And also they have bought the idea of climate resilient crops, varieties in their farms to help them adapt to climate change. So those are the ones I have for now, Emma.
Thank you very much, Maria. We'll also like to hear from Ram as well.
Yeah, in terms of what technologies, I think, this whole seasonal forecasts, I think, are probably, in my opinion, are critical, like especially if you speak about dryland farming. If you are able to use a seasonal forecast and basis that, plant the right appropriate crop, that probably substantially reduces the risk, especially to smallholder farmers, right? So, but in order for you to sort of get the seasonal forecast right, you need a whole suite of technologies. You need satellite imagery. You need a lot of automated weather stations. You need a lot of historical climate data. So there's a whole suite of technologies itself that enables a seasonal forecast, which in turn can then be coupled with other agricultural modeling approaches to sort of guide farmers on the right cropping strategies. Right? If you plant the right crop based on the upcoming season, I think that substantially reduces the risk to the farmer. Right? That is one. Second, I think another big opportunity is also around the financialization of climate risk. Right? Like weather index-based insurance, I think also is a very interesting innovation. But some of the factors that sort of inhibit a more wide-scale adoption and rollout of index-based insurance are the absence of data, right? Like for you to sort of quantify the weather risk, you need a lot of historical climate data. And most countries like India, or probably most countries in Africa, unfortunately, we never invested so much in weather station networks that, or cataloging of weather data, that we have enough historical climate data that can help in designing of more weather index-based insurance products, right? But fortunately, I think today there are some satellite imagery-based techniques using which you can start creating those historical data sets, right? So I think these are two promising, in my opinion, these are two promising innovations which I think can radically improve the smallholders' adaptability to climate risk.
Still on you, Ram, before you joined, we were discussing about the most effective channels for disseminating this information. So could you give us a few of these channels that you know of?
Yeah, no, I actually had joined possibly, but I heard Maria and Nono speak. So I think, yeah, I agree. Like probably radio is the most inclusive and most accessible, considering the constituents that we work with. Next to radio, I would also say, the feature phones, the good old feature phones, which still enable farmers to sort of receive text messages. I think that is also another effective channel for farmers to sort of receive information about weather information. But yeah, the promising opportunities are also smartphone-based applications, especially, let's not forget the fact that smartphones are getting cheaper by the day. The hardware is getting cheaper by the day. The mobile networks are getting incredibly more efficient. That is, with the rollout of 5G, I think the same network has the ability to carry more data to the hands of the farmer, right? So I think with the passage of time, our ability to convey richer and richer information to the farmers will start getting better and better, right? And once that happens, pretty much, I think a whole new set of challenges will start opening up, right? Like, okay, now that I can reach the farmer with 10x more information than what I was able to reach through a text message. The next question will be, okay, the farmer is probably not as literate as I would have hoped him or her to be, right? Like, so what are some of the visual cues? How do I need to design my mobile apps in terms of the user experience? How do I use latest innovations like a large language model to to convey the same information as a text, so on and so forth, right? So that will be probably second order challenges we'll start experiencing once smartphones become more popular. And the problem is not about transmitting data or soliciting feedback from the farmer. The problem statement will be more about how do I engage the farmer, get him or her to actually act on the mobile app, right?
Thank you very much for that extra knowledge. I would now like to hand it over to my colleague, Brian, who will guide us through the question and answer session. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much, Emma, for this wonderful session, as well as to our wonderful panelists on sharing that knowledge about different segments of climate information. I will just proceed and ask a few questions. First of all, there is a comment by Moses Ngogi. Probably, if I could read that, Moses would like to know, the comment reads, it will cost about $20 to cultivate 1 acre of maize in Kenya. Okay. So he's just asking around how to maximize financing, for specific yields in maize farming in Kenya. Probably this is not a question per se, but just to get an insight from Maria. You mentioned an aspect of lack of confidence from local smallholder farmers on climate information. How do we bridge this gap? How can we fill the gap in between climate science and local knowledge so that there is confidence among local smallholders in what we get? Probably Nono or Ram as well, you could come into that. And yeah.
As I had mentioned, that is a problem that also as an institution where the information, as the source of information is coming from, we have noticed there is lack of trust between us and the farmers, more specifically from the farmers. From our survey, I think most farmers said they don't trust our forecasts. I can admit that. And I want to attribute that to our complex systems here in Kenya, our terrain. For us to produce the forecast, we use models, which some of them have limitations to capture our small-scale systems, the convective systems. So that is something that we are working on. As Ram has mentioned, with the evolving technology, we are also working to improve our models around that so that we can have more localized information for the specific farmers. So that is one. And also we are also coordinating with farmers. We are also including their traditional way of forecasting, because I think they still forecast weather even without our information. They know when to plant, they know when to weed, they know when to irrigate and where to irrigate even without our information. So we are working on that to source their information, the indigenous knowledge that they are currently using, and we see how we can integrate that into our forecasting models. And we hope that this will buy the trust that is currently lost. With the inclusion of their knowledge, we see if there will be an improvement in what we issue to them, especially the agrometeorological information.
The question is on bridging the gap between scientific climate information and the local knowledge, so that there is complete trust between the two for locals, for the smallholder farmers.
Yeah, I mean, that is indeed a challenge, because even this science-based advisories, a lot of times, okay, you might advise something, asking farmers to plant a specific variety of a maize or a sorghum crop, right? But then farmers in the local communities might be referring to that, with a very different name altogether, right? So that issue of localizing the global scientific information in a locally comprehensible way is indeed a challenge. And I think, I mean, I'm not saying easy is easy, but fortunately, I think there are digital also can sort of digital coupled with some social innovations like focus group discussions or sort of gamification approaches. I think there are some pilots, promising pilots, where which help you sort of tap into the indigenous knowledge of local communities. And once you are able to digitize and bring that knowledge and then sort of blend that with the global knowledge which you are generating, I think then there's an opportunity of using some artificial intelligence to sort of start personalizing content, if not at the plot level, at least at a village level or at a community level, right? Because in all probability, most people in a community follow fairly homogeneous cultural and farming practices, use very common lexicon of terms. So the challenge has to be sort of creating the critical mass of science blended with the local community knowledge so that it answers at least to the needs of a community, right? Forget about trying to create something at a farm level for now. I think that's too expensive, and probably from a cost to benefit ratio, that's probably, it's not worth it. So probably I think we need a slightly more different strategy, sort of work more at a community level, homogeneous communities who have common cultural language practices, who pretty much have a certain homogeneous farming practices. So maybe that would be my sense. I know I'm aware of a few pilots where we've done, like, for instance, I'm part of a project called the Intelligent Systems Advisory Tool, where we used focus group discussions to sort of interview some farmers, then capture some of their insights, then codify those insights into a sort of a decision tree. And this decision tree basically works with the weather forecast as an input, right? So that's sort of a methodology to sort of blend weather forecast, which is generated almost at a global level, with some locally crowdsourced knowledge, right? Yeah, I mean, that's all I can offer on this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the insight. I'll just also again ask a question Arun has posted. And the question is, based on your experiences, what are some of the climate resistant technologies that have been deployed in the past, maybe from your organizations or from your work, and how useful have they been probably to you, Ram? And then maybe an additional intervention from Non and Maria.
So this is how can data analytics and predictive modeling contribute to improving crime? Okay. So again, I'll just come back to this. Okay, I'll give you a very simple example. If you look at the 30 years of climate data, right? You take Kenya as an example. Probably Kenya at the level of award, if you have historical climate data for the last 30 years, look at the data, and then, the data will, of course, tell you in the last 30 years, say October, November, December season, that data will immediately tell you what is the average rainfall that particular ward is receiving for October, November, December in the last 30 years. And it will also tell you, if you look at the data, it will also tell you the coefficient of variation, a lot of other things. Now, why is that data point important? Because if a ward is receiving 250 millimeter on an average, that means for 250 millimeter, the crop you should probably recommend to the farmer is probably a sorghum or a millet, not a maize. If the rainfall is, say, 400 millimeter, that is when you recommend a maize, right? So using data itself, you are initially trying to come up with a cropping strategy which reduces the risk by nearly 50%. Just to add more nuances to it. Now, if you know, there is a phenomenon called El Nino and La Nina. Okay. Now, if you correlate that data, I can tell you, I have looked at the data. Typically, when there is an El Nino, if a year is classified as El Nino, then Kenya receives on an average nearly 10 to 15% higher rainfall in that year than the normal years. So, and coincidentally, this happens to an El Nino year, right? So if a county receives on an average 250 millimeter rainfall in the last 30 years, the same data, you slice it and look at it in El Nino years, you will notice that county actually receives nearly 15 to 20% higher rainfall, which means it receives up to 300 millimeter rainfall. So that year is an opportunity for farmers to actually go for something like a maize and make higher money. Or if it's a La Nina years, it receives typically 10 to 15% less than rainfall. And coincidentally, the phenomenon is opposite. A La Nina leads to higher rainfall in Kenya and East and Southern Africa. It leads to lower than normal rainfall in India, right? So this is how, like, as you add more and more layers of data, and as you dig deeper and deeper into the data will itself throw you a lot of insights. I'm not saying it's going to suddenly change all the world, right? But imagine if you are the ward extension officer or the county extension officer, and every year before the start of the season, you are expected to sort of come up with a sort of a cropping strategy. If you suddenly start using the 30 years historical data, or if you suddenly start using the seasonal forecast information to slightly adjust your cropping strategies, I believe on an average at a county level or at a sub-county level, you will see that the number of farmers who lose their crops on account of climate risk probably will go down, right? So that's how data and analytics sort of starts translating into some sort of impact on the ground.
I'd like to actually add something on that. Just adding, I think, so this is quite high level kind of data collection, right? So from weather stations and professionals, I guess, in this space. And I think it's good overview to be able to see that. But sometimes I think the thing that we miss is us smallholder farmers at the farming levels ourselves, recording certain data for ourselves and really keeping track also allows us to look back and really understand what's happening in our farm, in our space. And if for example, a community of 10 farmers did the exact same thing around just understanding how much you can have a weather water station, right? To understand how much rain has been collected. So understanding that at a farm level, comparing with farmers, your rain levels, how much you're getting on a daily basis, simple things that you can record. But looking back, you'll be able to see how much water, how much rainfall you've had. Another one is the yields. Sometimes when we as smallholder farmers are selling, understanding with that rainfall and the yields that have come, those are just basic information that we can record ourselves and share amongst the community, so we can look back and have a sense of what's been happening. So that when you do have information that comes from above, you're able to understand what that actually means for you when you're comparing it. Because sometimes the information that's coming from, let's say, above, or that is general, you need to figure out how do you make it relevant for yourself on your little small plot. And if you have something that you have recorded on yourself, you can be able to see that trend, maybe even translating in the day-to-day work. And I think for me, that's really how you participate in being able to trying and understand how it's going to be relevant for yourself on your farm.
Okay, thank you. No, on that point, it's a very interesting question in relation to that. And this question is actually asking on how can we tailor specific climate information to smallholder farmers, considering factors like education level, affordability, technology, and so forth. Just to expand on that point, maybe you can expand on that to bring a broad understanding into that.
Okay. Yeah, financing is also, and for me, I think it's about those levels. Where is the finance being disseminated? If it's at farm level, as it was mentioned earlier, it can be a bit expensive, right, at that level. But for me, if you think about there's a lot of programs that are funding young people. And I'm going to keep, obviously, in my work, seeing that, giving young people an opportunity to come up with solutions that can be relevant for their community. And so someone at that level, we're assuming this is someone who's educated, someone who has some kind of knowledge, and obviously that background of what's happening on the ground, and is able to actually put together ideas to access that funding that can support those in their community. So for me, there's always an understanding as to at what level should this funding really be filtering through. So if we're focusing on the solution, so these young people or anyone who's really interested in providing a solution for a community, then that's a right level to kind of be accessing that funding. Anything below that on, me doing it for my own farm, that's really expensive, right? And so for me, and as I said, it's about understanding at which level we're going to access that funding. The other level, of course, you're looking at, which is above that, which is these associations or weather stations who are actually accessing. There are funds that are appropriate for all of these. And so for me, as I said, it's around understanding the various levels at which you're participating to access the various funds. Yeah, it's a complicated business when it comes into funding and investment.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And just probably also just to build on the fact that we have, the smallholder farmers and the climate information maybe at high level. And there is also a more question in the chat box that I see that how can we really build on a feedback loop for this information system so that, the climate services reach where they need to be in a tailor-made form. So how can we advance a feedback loop and build on it so that smallholder farmers are getting the right information at the right time? Maybe you can come in.
Thank you. I think we can start with, I think as Nono keeps on insisting, training of our farmers. That there is climate information, and just as she has mentioned that you can keep your own record, and also there is a feedback loop. One of the example that I'll give is in our forecast issues. We have our people on the ground. Some are agricultural extension officers, and also we have meteorology county directors. So they are free and accessible. I think they have their offices back in especially in the regions where agriculture is the main source of livelihood for the people. So I think it's just about training them, capacity building them, that, if there is anything, there's somewhere you can go. And also there's somewhere you can go access information and also request for information and also give feedback on the same. So I think in our issues, we have a mobile number where you can contact. So that is one of the feedback loop. And also we have the text SMS platform or channels for our farmers who have phones. So they're also advised to share any information that they have concerning what is happening around their area. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ram, and probably in addition, Ram, you could also highlight one of the questions that was asked on whether you have specific climate technologies that are touching either on livestock and water resilience. Maybe you can also touch on that alongside.
Okay, yeah. So let me just try and take a crack at this feedback loops. I think probably one of the pitfalls of the current climate information services for agriculture, the way we know it is, we just have a bunch of data points and information products, and we just disseminating them. We have figured out a channel to push them to the farmer, and we seem to be assuming that that will work the magic, right? Perhaps it is working the magic, but not to the full potential that it could impact, right? So rather my take is, how do you sort of flip the question? So my thing is, for a target community or a homogeneous group of farmers who probably grow the same crop or probably are in some of the same farming system, try to sort of do a sample and try to understand the perception of the farmers that they have about climate information services, understand what are some of the important decisions that they make during the start of the season, in the middle of the season, towards the end of the season, and do any of those decisions have a sort of a critical input from a climate and a weather standpoint. So firstly, I mean, my belief is only when your advisory contains information that really sort of matches the demand of the farmer, will there be better uptake. Otherwise, we'll keep on just disseminating information, which probably is another SMS on the farmer's phone, and the farmers probably couldn't care less. They'll just read the image and do away with it, right? So it's easier said than done. I think the whole process of deployment of agriculture climate information services has to be more participatory. It's a co-production process. It's not a production process, it's a co-production process. So it apart from technology, you also need a lot of institutional and a lot of social innovation, right? So that is one. And in terms of feedback, in terms of generic feedback, I think technology is also offering us a lot more avenues, right? Today, through text messages, you can solicit farmers' feedback. If you have a mobile app and a slightly more literate farmer, a champion farmer is more proactive. So there are also other advances, but primarily my suggestion is at the design stage itself, you need to have a lot of co-opting and a co-creation process so that the informational products that you are creating actually matches the demands of the farmer, right? That's one. Coming to some climate technology for livestock, absolutely. I think, like for instance, in dryland farming, rainfall forecast or seasonal forecast of the rainfall is the important parameter, right? In the case of livestock, like in dairy productivity, there are scientific studies which tell you that, during extreme heat stress events, the cattle typically loses its productivity, or a lot of extreme heat events or extreme rainfall events also have a strong correlation with disease or disease incidents, right? So there is science. It's probably out there somewhere in a bunch of journal papers. The real task is sort of take that science, put it in a machine readable form and convert that into an advisory, right? From ILRI standpoint, I can give you an example of a project called CASNet, where ILRI researchers have deployed a mobile-based system where some citizen volunteers, they collect information from households about their household nutrition. They collect information about rangeland health. They collect information about market prices, livestock market prices, right? So why do we collect these three seemingly unrelated pieces of data? Because when you aggregate all these data points and look at this data longitudinally, it does tell you that probably due to a drought, okay, there is some stress that is beginning to start manifesting in households. So what happens is, as there is drought, as rangelands sort of dry up on account of drought, so the cattle does not have sufficient pasture for feeding, right? And naturally that leads to a loss of income for the farmer, and that sort of reflects in the lower nutritional intake, right? And then what happens, farmers then out of distress, they go and sell their cattle in the livestock market prices, right? So three seemingly unrelated pieces of information, but when you put them all together, this sort of acts as an early warning indicator. So so ILRI's index-based livestock insurance is one such innovation where, based on triangulating these three data points, you trigger an insurance payout to the beneficiaries in these counties, so that once the farmers get those payouts, they buy food and ensure their nutritional security and don't necessarily resort to distress sale of cattle, right? So these are some examples that I can think of.
Thank you very much. These are very insightful thoughts, as well as initiatives that are going in at ILRI and the other organizations too. I will take back to Emma, who will then proceed to highlight the next steps. Thank you. To you, Emma.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brian. So we will finally conclude with the final remarks from our panelists, Nono, Maria, and Ram, in that order. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Emma. Yeah, I've also learned quite a bit from Ram and Maria, and I think just the one thing I'd like to always stress is how we teach our smallholder farmers to make things relevant for themselves. Like, that's really, really important. There is a lot of information, there's a lot of work being done, but a lot of it can literally go over our heads. And so for me, it's empowering our farmers to really be able to know how to consume the information and make it relevant for themselves, to be able to use them, because there's no use the information being there and it's not being used. So yeah, so that's my overview around climate resilience at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Nono, for that. I will also echo you. I think we need to start with training. A lot of training needs to be done around with our farmers. First of all, we need to let them know that they need the climate information just for future sake. The way climate has been, the situation, and also the education around climate risks, floods, drought. We need to also educate them on how important is the information around that, the risks, so that they can also secure their livestock and their plants. So that is on insurance based. And also I think another take home is on the dissemination channels. I think, no, I'm going to take home, we need to insist on the way you have mentioned the young children in school. I'd like to see that happening in Kenya. I don't think it has taken that first step in Kenya. So that is one thing I'm going to propose in our institutions. Yeah, so it's a good way, because also for the, illiterate farmers, if their kids go to school and learn the information, they can bring home to their parents. So that's one key thing. Yeah, and also generally, I think I've learned a lot from all of us. Yeah, so thank you, Emma, and the organizers for this webinar.
So final remarks? Okay, yeah, so see, it's I think it's at a very nascent stage, this whole business of climate information services for agriculture, in a relatively, it's probably still at a very nascent stage. A lot more needs to be in, a lot of innovation money, a lot of new experiments, a lot of new partnerships, a lot more mobilization of communities is needed around this topic, right? Yeah, so a lot more science needs to be done. So I'll close with that.
Yeah, I would like to close by thanking you, Maria, for agreeing to attend this webinar and for sharing your insights on climate information services. We also thank you very much, Nono. We are very grateful for sparing time to attend this webinar. Thank you, Ram, for sharing the great insights on this, and also to our marvelous participants for the questions. Those who have not asked questions today, we believe that next time you'll have a great session to share your insights as well. We will be having the next session of this series of webinar in the month of July. That's subject to confirmation. And we highly invite you to share knowledge and also disseminate so that we are able to support our smallholder farmers within the face of climate change. And to sum it all, 3 takeaways. That's in terms of access, in terms of reliability and quality of climate information services, is really an area that really cuts across the 3 speakers. And this is somewhere we can build different technologies as well as innovations to keep empowering farmers from different parts of the world. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you again, and see you soon in the next quarter.